A cop frames an innocent black girl in court, but he has no idea who she really is. That quiet 12-year-old in the yellow dress? She's the daughter of the U.S. Attorney General. And when her father storms into the courtroom, everything changes. Why was she targeted? Why did her father disappear years ago? And what secrets are about to come crashing down? This is a gripping story of betrayal, buried power, and a girl no one saw coming. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Through the library's tall windows, afternoon sunlight painted golden squares on the worn carpet. Ayanna Brooks gathered her papers and pencils as 3 second graders bounced around her, their faces bright with newfound understanding. So, division is just like sharing cookies with friends? Little Tommy asked, clutching his math worksheet, his freckled face scrunched in concentration. Ayanna smiled, smoothing her yellow dress as she stood. That's right. And you did such a good job today, all of you. Her voice was gentle but clear, like her mother's when she spoke from the pulpit. The children had struggled with division all week, but today something had finally clicked. Sarah, the smallest of the 3, wrapped her arms around Ayanna's waist. Thank you, Miss Ayanna. Can you help us again next week? Her pigtails bobbed as she looked up with hopeful eyes. Of course, Ayanna replied, carefully tucking her worn Bible into her book bag. She held her copy of Anne of Green Gables close to her chest. She loved how Anne never let anyone dim her spirit, no matter what challenges she faced. The book's spine was cracked from countless readings, each page a familiar friend. Mrs. Penny Lewis, the librarian, looked up from her desk as Ayanna approached. Her reading glasses caught the light as she smiled warmly. Those children adore you, dear. You have such a gift for teaching. She adjusted a stack of returned books with weathered hands. Thank you, Mrs. Lewis. Ayanna's pressed curls bounced slightly as she nodded. Mama always says that sharing knowledge is sharing love. The words felt right in her mouth, like a family prayer. The library door chimed softly as Ayanna stepped out into the warm spring afternoon. Main Street stretched before her, lined with familiar storefronts and flowering dogwood trees. The air smelled sweet with newly bloomed azaleas, and Ayanna felt a flutter of joy in her chest. Her mother had stayed up late last night finishing this yellow dress, sewing by lamplight until her fingers were sore, and wearing it made Ayanna feel like sunshine itself. Mr. Chen waved from his flower shop, arranging bright tulips in a window display. Looking lovely today, Miss Brooks, he called out, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. Thank you, sir, Ayanna replied, her patent leather shoes clicking steadily on the sidewalk. She noticed old Mr. Watson sweeping his porch across the street, but when she raised her hand to wave, he quickly looked away. She let her hand drop slowly, used to such reactions. Her mother had taught her to hold her head high, regardless. Walk like you belong everywhere, Mama always said. A scraggly tabby cat meowed near Henderson's bakery, and Ayanna couldn't resist stopping to scratch behind its ears. Hello, sweet thing, she murmured, breathing in the mixed scents of fresh bread and spring air. The cat purred, rubbing against the skirt of her yellow dress, leaving orange hairs that Ayanna gently brushed away. Reaching into her pocket, Ayanna felt the coins her mother had given her that morning. For a treat after tutoring, Mama had said with a wink, pressing the warm coins into her palm. The corner store was just ahead, its faded awning promising cold drinks and candy. Ayanna straightened up, said goodbye to the cat, and started across the street, already imagining the sweet taste of cherry licorice. She never made it to the door. The patrol car seemed to appear from nowhere, tires screeching as it pulled up sharply to the curb. Deputy Michael Rourke stepped out, his boots heavy on the pavement, and his face set in hard lines. His badge caught the sunlight, flashing like a warning. Well, well, if it isn't Ruth Brooks' girl, he drawled, positioning himself between Ayanna and the store entrance. Got a report about a theft and assault at this establishment. Mr. Clancy's pretty shaken up. His hand rested casually on his belt, near his holster. Ayana's heart began to pound. "Sir, I haven't even gone inside yet." She clutched her book bag tighter, fingers trembling against the worn fabric. "That's so?" Deputy Rourke's voice was cold. He reached for her book bag. "Then you won't mind if I take a look in here?" His fingers dug into the strap, pulling it from her shoulder. Before Ayana could respond, he was roughly pulling items from her bag. Her Bible thumped to the ground, and she flinched as he dug deeper. "Well, what do we have here?" His hand emerged, holding a delicate silver bracelet she had never seen before. It dangled from his fingers, catching the light. "That's not mine," Ayana's voice cracked. "I didn't take anything." She reached for her fallen Bible, but Deputy Rourke pushed her hand away. "Sure you didn't." Deputy Rourke grabbed her wrist, and the sound of handcuffs clicking shut seemed to echo down the entire street. "Mr. Clancy says different. Says you pushed him down when he tried to stop you." His grip tightened, cold metal biting into her skin. Tears began to blur Ayana's vision. "Please, I didn't. I would never." She could see people gathering on the sidewalk, their faces a mix of shock and something else, something that looked too much like they'd been expecting this. Some looked away, others whispered behind raised hands. "That's the preacher's girl," someone whispered loud enough for her to hear. Even the good ones snap sooner or later. The words stung like slaps against her cheeks. Ayana's legs felt weak as Deputy Rourke pushed her toward the patrol car. Her copy of Anne of Green Gables lay forgotten on the sidewalk, its pages fluttering in the spring breeze. Through her tears, she caught glimpses of familiar faces. Mr. Chen looking away, Mr. Watson shaking his head, the tabby cat darting into an alley. People she'd known her whole life, suddenly strangers. "Mama!" she cried out as the deputy shoved her into the back seat. "Please, I want my mama!" Her voice broke on the last word, high and desperate. Across the street, a teenage boy held up his phone, recording everything, but his thumb hovered over the screen, uncertain, as the patrol car's door slammed shut. The yellow dress that Ruth Brooks had sewn with such care caught in the closing door, a bright flutter of fabric against the dark interior, like a trapped butterfly beating its wings. Ruth's hands shook as she stirred the pot of chicken and dumplings on the stove. The evening news played softly in the background, a familiar comfort as she prepared dinner, just like any other day. But this wasn't any other day. The wooden spoon moved mechanically through the thick broth as her mind wandered to Ayana's empty seat at the table. Breaking news from downtown Rosewood. The anchor's voice caught her attention. Ruth looked up just as grainy security camera footage filled the screen. Her wooden spoon clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the suddenly silent kitchen. There was her baby girl in that yellow dress, the one Ruth had stayed up late finishing just last week, carefully stitching the hem with love in every thread. But instead of seeing Ayana's usual graceful walk, she watched in horror as her daughter was forced into a police car, the dress crumpling as rough hands pushed her inside. Ayana's face, even in the blurry footage, showed confusion and fear that pierced Ruth's heart. No. No, no. Ruth's legs gave out, and she gripped the counter to stay upright. The plate she'd been holding slipped from her fingers, shattering on the linoleum. She barely heard it break above the roaring in her ears. Tiny ceramic shards scattered across the floor like the pieces of her world falling apart. The 12-year-old suspect was arrested in connection with... The rest of the words faded into a dull roar in Ruth's ears. Without thinking, she ran for the door, not even bothering to remove her apron or turn off the stove. Her purse was snatched from the hook by the door in one fluid motion, her car keys jingling wildly in her trembling hand. The drive to the police station was a blur. Ruth's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. She ran a red light, barely noticed a stop sign, her mind fixed on a single thought: get to Ayana. She parked crookedly, half on the curb, and burst through the precinct doors, the bell above jangling violently with her entrance. "My daughter," she demanded, her voice steady despite the panic coursing through her. "I need to see my daughter, Ayanna Brooks." Ruth straightened her shoulders, summoning the dignity she'd always worn like armor. The desk sergeant, O'Connell, according to his nameplate, barely looked up from his computer. His fingers continued typing as if she weren't even there. "Fill out these forms." He slid a stack of papers across the counter. "Someone will be with you when they can." His voice carried the bored indifference of a man who'd said these same words 1,000 times before. Ruth's hand trembled as she picked up a pen. How long? The pen felt foreign in her grip, her normally elegant handwriting now unsteady. "Could be a while. We're pretty busy tonight." His tone was dismissive, bored even. He glanced past her to the empty waiting room, the lie obvious but unchallenged. Minutes ticked by. Ruth filled out form after form, her normally neat handwriting growing increasingly unsteady. The clock on the wall seemed to mock her with each passing second. When she tried to hand them back, O'Connell had disappeared for his coffee break, his chair spinning slightly as if he'd just vacated it. "This is ridiculous," Ruth muttered, her composure finally cracking. "My baby is 12 years old. Someone needs to tell me what's going on right now." Her voice echoed in the empty reception area, bouncing off the institutional green walls. A black female officer appeared from around the corner, her eyes kind, but cautious. "Mrs. Brooks," she said quietly. "I'm Officer Wilkes. Come with me." She gestured with a subtle nod of her head toward a hallway, checking over her shoulder as she did. Ruth followed Officer Wilkes down a dim hallway, their footsteps echoing against the concrete floors. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting strange shadows on the scuffed walls. The officer glanced over her shoulder before unlocking a heavy door. "5 minutes," she whispered. "That's all I can give you. I'm not supposed to do this at all." The holding area was cold and stark. Ruth's heart clenched when she saw Ayanna curled up on a metal bench, her yellow dress wrinkled and dirty. Her daughter's eyes were red and puffy, her neat curls now disheveled. A small bruise was forming on her wrist where the handcuffs had been too tight. "Baby girl," Ruth breathed, rushing forward and kneeling in front of the bench. She took Ayanna's face in her hands, thumbs gently wiping away tears. "I'm here now. We're going to fix this." Her voice cracked on the last word, betraying the confidence she was trying to project. Ayanna's lower lip trembled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she let out a small, broken sob that shattered Ruth's heart into pieces. Her small shoulders shook with the effort of containing her fear. "Listen to me," Ruth said firmly, even as her own eyes filled with tears. "You hold on to your truth. Whatever they're saying, we know who you are. God knows who you are." She smoothed back Ayanna's hair, her touch gentle but resolute. "Time's up," Officer Wilkes called softly from the doorway, her eyes darting nervously down the hall. Ruth stood, straightening her spine. "I'm posting bail right now. She's coming home with me tonight." She squeezed Ayanna's hand one last time, trying to pour all her strength into that single touch. But when she reached the front desk again, Deputy Rourke was waiting. His cold eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he blocked her path, his tall frame deliberately intimidating as he leaned against the counter. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mrs. Brooks," he drawled. "Given the severity of the charges and the risk of flight, we'll be holding her until her hearing." His smile never reached his eyes. "Flight risk," Ruth's voice rose. "She's 12 years old. Where exactly do you think she's going to run to?" She fought to keep her composure, knowing that losing control would only make things worse. "We have multiple witness statements." Rourke began shuffling through papers on the desk, making a show of organizing documents that seemed purposely disorganized. "Let me see them." Ruth reached for the papers, but Rourke pulled them back, holding them just out of her reach. "That's confidential information. But Judge Martinez has already reviewed everything and denied bail by phone. He tapped the papers against the desk, straightening them with exaggerated care. Ruth's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She pulled out her phone and stepped away from the desk, dialing a familiar number with shaking fingers. The phone felt slippery in her sweaty palm. "Deacon Henry, I need your help." She explained the situation in hushed tones, hope rising in her chest, until she heard his heavy sigh. She leaned against the wall, suddenly needing its support. "Ruth, honey, you know I'll do whatever I can," the deacon said gently. "But these small-town courts, they have their own way of doing things. They can drag this out for days before we can even get proper representation down there." His voice carried years of experience with Rosewood's particular brand of justice. Ruth's shoulders slumped. "They can't just keep her here. She's just a child." Her voice dropped to a whisper. The fight temporarily drained from her. "I'll start making calls right now," he promised. "But it might take some time. Go home. Get some rest. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint." The drive home felt endless. Ruth's house was dark and silent when she arrived, the pot of chicken and dumplings still sitting on the cold stove. The food had congealed into an unappetizing mass. She couldn't bring herself to clean it up. The broken plate pieces still littered the floor, a hazard she simply stepped around. Instead, she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, her body heavy with exhaustion. Each step required deliberate effort. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she clutched her phone to her chest, waiting for it to ring with news, any news, that might help her daughter. The battery was running low, but she couldn't bear to plug it in and risk missing a call. When no call came, she reached for her Bible on the nightstand, holding it close. The worn leather cover was soft against her fingers, pages falling open to passages she'd marked during other crises. Across town, in a cold cell, Ayanna lay on her metal bench. Her soft voice wavered as she whispered the words her mother had taught her. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." But the familiar comfort of the psalm faded into silence as her voice failed her, the darkness of the cell swallowing her whispered prayers. The morning sun painted long shadows across the holding room's concrete floor as Ruth's fingers moved with practiced grace through Ayanna's hair. The familiar rhythm of braiding, something she'd done countless times at their kitchen table, felt different here in this cold, sterile space. Her daughter sat perfectly still, shoulders straight, despite the weight pressing down on them both. "Almost done, baby," Ruth whispered, her voice steady, even as her heart raced beneath her carefully chosen outfit. She'd selected black slacks and a navy blouse that spoke of dignity and respect, the same respect she prayed the court would show her daughter. Every thread, every button felt like armor against what was coming. Ayanna's yellow dress from yesterday had been replaced with a modest gray skirt and white blouse. The change felt symbolic somehow, as if the brightness of yesterday had been deliberately dimmed by unseen hands. But Ruth could still see her daughter's inner light shining through, in her perfect posture, in her quiet strength, in the way her eyes remained clear and focused, despite everything. Court Officer Miles appeared at the door, his keys jangling like a warning bell. "Time to go," he announced, not unkindly but with firm authority that left no room for delay. Ruth finished the last braid with a gentle tug and squeezed Ayanna's shoulders, leaning down so their eyes met. "Remember what I told you. Hold your head high. God knows the truth, and that truth will protect you." They walked hand in hand through the courthouse corridors, their footsteps echoing against marble floors that seemed to stretch endlessly. Every step brought more stares, more whispers that clung to them like cobwebs. Local reporters clutched notepads, their pens poised like weapons ready to strike. Town locals filled the wooden benches, some faces softened with sympathy, others hardened with judgment. They had no right to pass. Mrs. Peterson from the quilting circle, who had praised Ruth's stitches just last Sunday, avoided her eyes completely. Mr. Thompson, who'd always praised Ayanna's help with the church youth group and called her a blessing to this community, suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. The weight of their silence felt heavier than any accusation shouted aloud. The juvenile courtroom was cramped and suffocating, the air thick with tension and the lingering smell of furniture polish that couldn't mask the staleness. Ruth guided Ayanna to their seats at the defense table, positioning herself like a human shield between her daughter and Deputy Rourke's smirking presence in the corner. "All rise." The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs like a knife. Judge Wallace Thorne entered, his black robes swishing as he took his seat at the bench. His weathered face showed little interest in the proceedings, as if this was just another tedious task to complete before his upcoming retirement. "Be seated," he drawled, adjusting his reading glasses with fingers that seemed impatient. "Case number 2023 JV 142, State v. Brooks." He glanced at the papers before him with barely concealed disinterest. Prosecutor Linda Avery rose from her chair, her tailored suit as sharp as her tone. "Your Honor, the state presents evidence of a serious assault and theft committed by the juvenile defendant." Deputy Rourke took the stand, his uniform pressed to perfection, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The smugness in his eyes made Ruth's stomach turn with disgust and fear. "Deputy Rourke," Avery began, pacing deliberately, "please describe what you witnessed." "I observed the defendant," he pointed at Ayanna with unnecessary emphasis, "fleeing the scene after Mr. Clancy's assault. Upon search, we recovered this bracelet." He held up an evidence bag containing a delicate silver chain that caught the light. Ruth's hands clenched in her lap until her knuckles whitened. That bracelet hadn't been anywhere near Ayanna's belongings yesterday. She knew it as surely as she knew her own child. "We also have security footage," Rourke continued, nodding to someone who started a video on the courtroom screen. The black and white images were frustratingly unclear, showing only a vague figure near the store entrance that could have been anyone. "And Mr. Clancy's statement?" Avery prompted, her voice dripping with false concern. Rourke produced a document with a flourish. "The victim clearly identifies the defendant as his attacker. He describes her as hostile and unpredictable during the encounter." Ayanna flinched at those words, a tiny movement that only a mother would notice, and Ruth felt her daughter's pain like a physical blow to her chest. This sweet child who spent her afternoons tutoring younger kids, who gathered fallen birds' nests to protect them from harm, being painted as some kind of violent criminal. "Objection!" Ruth stood suddenly, unable to contain the fury and desperation bubbling inside her. "My daughter would never—" "Mrs. Brooks," Judge Thorne's voice cracked like a whip across the room. "You are not an attorney. One more outburst and you'll be held in contempt. Is that clear?" "But, Your Honor," the words caught in her throat. "Is that clear?" Each word fell like a gavel. Ruth sank back into her seat, feeling the sting of tears behind her eyes. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. Ayanna needed her strength, not her tears. The morning dragged on like a funeral procession as the prosecution built their case on lies and half-truths. Each false statement, each twisted truth, felt like another brick in a wall being built between Ruth and her daughter's freedom. Judge Thorne leaned forward, adjusting his glasses again with an impatient gesture. His expression suggested he'd already made his decision, despite not having heard a single word from Ayanna or her defense. Ruth's hands trembled as she stood once more, desperate to protect her child from this travesty. But before she could speak, before the judge could admonish her again, she felt Ayanna's small hand touch her own. "Your Honor," Ayanna's clear voice rang out in the hushed courtroom, steady as a church bell. "May I speak for myself?" The simple dignity in those words brought Ruth's heart to her throat. She looked down at her daughter, this beautiful, brave girl who somehow found the courage to stand in the face of such injustice, and slowly retook her seat, recognizing something powerful awakening in her child. Ayanna rose from her seat, her yellow dress now wrinkled from a night in holding but her dignity intact. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she stepped forward, her Mary Jane shoes making soft clicks against the worn courtroom floor. The room seemed to grow larger around her small frame, but her voice, when it came, filled every corner. "Your Honor," she began, her words clear and measured. "I'd like to tell you exactly where I was yesterday afternoon." Judge Thorne's eyebrows lifted slightly. He glanced at the prosecutor, then back at the composed 12-year-old before him. "Very well," he said, settling back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "At 3:45 p.m. yesterday, I finished my regular tutoring session at the Rosewood Public Library," Ayanna continued. "I was working with 3 second graders, Tommy Martinez, Sarah Chen, and Marcus Washington. We were practicing multiplication tables and reading comprehension." Her hands, clasped in front of her, remained steady as stone. "Tommy struggled with 7 times 8, but by the end of our session, he got it right 3 times in a row. He was so proud he gave me a high five before he left." The prosecutor shuffled through her papers, a slight frown creasing her forehead. Her red-painted fingernails tapped nervously against the wooden table. "Mrs. Lewis, the librarian, was at the front desk when I left. She commented on my dress, the one my mother made me." Ayanna's voice carried a hint of pride, a small light in her otherwise solemn expression. "She said the sunflowers matched my smile. I signed out in the volunteer logbook, which she timestamps every day. It should show I left at exactly 3:45. Deputy Rourke's chair creaked as he shifted his weight. The smug expression he'd worn earlier began to fade, his eyes darting toward the exit door. "I walked down Main Street after that. Mr. Rodriguez was arranging tulips outside his flower shop, yellow ones like my dress. He waved to me like he always does. Mr. Peterson was sweeping his porch, just like he does every afternoon when the mail comes." Ayanna's recollection was precise, each detail adding weight to her words, building a fortress of truth around her. "I stopped to pet the stray tabby cat that lives behind Mrs. Chen's bakery. She has a torn left ear and always meows 3 times before letting anyone touch her. I call her Patches." The courtroom had fallen completely silent. Even the usual shuffling of papers and clearing of throats had ceased. Judge Thorne leaned forward, his reading glasses forgotten in his hand, his gaze fixed on the young girl who spoke with such clarity. "I was going to the corner store to buy a lemonade. My mother gave me 75 cents that morning. 2 quarters and a quarter she found under the couch when she was vacuuming." Ayanna's voice remained steady, though her fingers tightened slightly around each other, the only sign of her inner tension. "I counted it twice before leaving home. I never made it inside the store. Deputy Rourke's patrol car pulled up before I could reach the door. He didn't even turn off his engine." The prosecutor, Linda Avery, was now frantically flipping through her notes, her earlier confidence visibly shaken. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple despite the courtroom's chill. Deputy Rourke's face had taken on an ashen quality, his earlier swagger replaced by rigid tension, his jaw clenched tight. "The bracelet they say I stole?" Ayanna continued. "I've never seen it before it was pulled from my bag. The bag that was behind me when Deputy Rourke searched it. The bag that contains my Bible, my library card, and the copy of Anne of Green Gables I've been reading during lunch break. My bookmark was on page 87, where Anne breaks her slate over Gilbert's head." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, quickly silenced by Judge Thorne's warning glare. But before he could speak, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a decisive thud that echoed like a judge's final gavel. The sound of purposeful footsteps filled the sudden silence. Every head turned as a tall, distinguished black man in an impeccably tailored suit strode down the center aisle, flanked by 2 federal agents. His presence seemed to compress the air in the room, making it harder to breathe. His face was a mask of controlled fury, his eyes fixed on the judge's bench like laser beams. Judge Thorne's mouth fell open slightly. Deputy Rourke's face lost what little color remained, turning the shade of old paper. The prosecutor dropped her pen, which clattered noisily in the hushed courtroom, spinning across the polished surface. The man, Elijah Brooks, moved with the authority of someone who commanded rooms far more powerful than this small-town courthouse. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, clicked against the floor with military precision. The federal agents beside him moved with practiced efficiency, their faces professionally neutral, but their presence undeniably intimidating, hands resting near their badges. Without waiting for acknowledgement or permission, Elijah Brooks stepped to the front of the courtroom. His voice, when it came, was like thunder contained in silk, deep and resonant. "I am Elijah Brooks, United States Attorney General." His words carried to every corner of the room, seeming to make the very walls tremble. "And the girl you are trying to railroad." He paused, his gaze sweeping from Rourke to the prosecutor to the judge, each withering under his stare, "is my daughter." Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. Someone in the back row dropped a notebook. Judge Thorne's gavel slipped from his fingers, landing with a dull thud on his desk. Deputy Rourke's smirk, which had been his shield throughout the proceedings, vanished completely, replaced by naked fear, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the courthouse steps as chaos erupted. Ayanna's yellow dress, now wrinkled from hours in the holding cell, caught the light as federal agents whisked her toward a waiting black SUV. Her small frame seemed to shrink between the towering men in dark suits, making her appear even younger than her 12 years. Elijah Brooks moved with practiced authority, his perfectly tailored suit and commanding presence creating a path through the crowd. He kept one hand raised to shield Ayanna's face from the relentless camera flashes, while Agent Carter cleared the way ahead and Agent Liu brought up the rear. His jaw remained tight, eyes focused straight ahead like a man on a mission. "Mr. Brooks, is it true she's your daughter?" "Attorney General, how long have you known? Was this a cover-up?" The questions came like bullets, but Elijah's face remained stone still, years of political training evident in his measured steps and neutral expression. Each flash of cameras illuminated the stern lines of his face, revealing nothing. He hadn't looked back once, not at the courthouse, not at the chaos, and not at Ruth. Ruth Brooks pushed against the tide of bodies, her heart pounding against her ribs. The crowd seemed to swell around her, pressing in from all sides. "Ayanna!" she called out, her voice cracking with desperation, but her words were lost in the roar of questions and camera clicks. A burly security guard stepped directly into her path, blocking her view. "Ma'am, you need to stay back," he said, spreading his arms to create a barrier. His expression was firm, but not unkind. "That's my daughter," Ruth said, her voice cracking. Tears threatened to spill from her eyes. "Please, I'm her mother. She needs me." But the guard didn't budge. Ruth could only watch helplessly as Ayanna was guided into the back seat of the SUV. The girl's face appeared briefly in the window, eyes wide, lips trembling, fingers pressed against the glass, before the tinted glass swallowed her from view. The slam of the car door echoed in Ruth's chest like a final blow. Inside the courthouse, Judge Thorne's chambers had become a temporary command center. The elderly judge sat behind his desk, looking decidedly uncomfortable as Agents Carter and Liu presented their federal orders. Stacks of hastily prepared paperwork covered the polished oak surface. The charges against Ayanna Brooks were being dropped immediately, and all local jurisdiction was being superseded by federal authority. "This is highly irregular," Judge Thorne muttered, adjusting his glasses nervously. His hands shook slightly as he signed the necessary papers, the pen scratching loudly in the tense silence. The weight of the U.S. Attorney General's involvement had transformed a simple local case into a political powder keg. He'd never seen anything like it in his 30 years on the bench. Outside, news vans were already appearing like vultures, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky. Reporters who had been covering small-town stories just hours ago were now making frantic calls to their national desks, their faces animated with the excitement of breaking news. The sleepy town of Rosewood was about to become the epicenter of a media storm, its quiet streets invaded by the hungry machinery of national news. In a nearby federal building, Elijah Brooks stood before a hastily assembled podium. Camera lights bathed him in harsh brightness as he cleared his throat. His statement was clinical, precise, and carefully crafted. Today, I can confirm that Ayanna Brooks is indeed my biological daughter. In light of recent events, she has been placed under federal protection while we investigate what appears to be a case of targeted harassment. I ask for privacy during the sensitive time as we work to ensure her safety and well-being. No mention of Ruth. No acknowledgement of the woman who had raised Ayanna alone for 12 years. Not a single word about the mother who had sewn that yellow dress with loving hands. In the span of a few sentences, Ruth Brooks had been erased from her own daughter's narrative, reduced to a footnote in a political statement. Ruth stood rooted to the courthouse steps long after the crowds had thinned. The afternoon heat had given way to a cooler breeze that ruffled her Sunday dress, but she barely noticed. Her eyes remained fixed on the spot where the SUV had been, as if staring hard enough might bring it back. Her handbag hung limply at her side, containing Ayanna's hairbrush and favorite lip gloss, small things she'd thought her daughter might need. A young reporter approached her cautiously, notepad in hand. "Mrs. Brooks, would you like to make a statement? People want to hear your side." Ruth's hands gripped the iron railing of the courthouse gate. The metal was warm under her fingers, solid and real when everything else felt like it was slipping away. Her knuckles turned white with the force of her grip. "Don't take my baby," she whispered, but not to the reporter. To the empty street, to the fading sunlight, to anyone who might be listening. The words hung in the air, a mother's prayer with nowhere to land. Through the rear window of the SUV, Ayanna pressed her palm against the glass. Her face was a mask of confusion and fear as she watched her mother grow smaller in the distance. The yellow dress her mother had sewn with such care was now crushed against the leather seat, its brightness dimmed in the tinted windows. She could still smell the faint scent of their home, cinnamon and lavender, clinging to the fabric. Agent Liu sat beside her, maintaining a professional distance, but watching the girl carefully. She adjusted her dark blazer and offered a small smile. "You'll be safe now," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "We're taking you somewhere secure." Ayanna didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the courthouse until it disappeared around a corner, taking with it the last glimpse of her mother's solitary figure against the grand stone steps. She pulled her hand back from the window slowly, leaving a small smudge on the pristine glass, the only evidence she had tried to reach back. The SUV moved smoothly through the streets of Rosewood, past the library where she had tutored just yesterday, past the corner store where everything had gone wrong. News vans were already setting up their equipment on Main Street, their crews rushing to capture B-roll of the small southern town that had suddenly become the center of a national story. Familiar faces stopped to stare as the government vehicle glided by, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. In the front seat, Elijah Brooks spoke quietly into his phone, issuing directives and managing the crisis with the same efficiency he brought to matters of state. His deep voice filled the car with unfamiliar authority. He hadn't met Ayanna's eyes since they left the courthouse. Perhaps he couldn't bear to see Ruth's features reflected there, or perhaps he was simply doing what he had always done, handling problems from a safe distance where emotions couldn't interfere with strategy. The late afternoon sun caught the church steeple as they drove past, turning the white paint golden in the fading light. Ayanna thought of all the Sundays she had spent there, watching her mother preach about faith and forgiveness, her strong voice filling the small sanctuary with hope. Now she was being driven away from everything familiar, everything safe, by a father she had never known and agents who called themselves protectors, but felt like strangers. Ruth's whispered words seemed to echo in the space between heartbeats. "Don't take my baby." But they were already gone, leaving behind a town on the verge of transformation and a mother standing alone in the growing shadows of an unseasonably warm spring day, her arms empty and her heart breaking with every mile that stretched between them. The Atlanta skyline glowed through floor-to-ceiling windows as Ayanna Brooks stood in the middle of Suite 2401. The plush cream carpet felt foreign under her feet, nothing like the worn hardwood of home. Everything sparkled with wealth. Crystal vases, modern art on the walls, furniture that looked too perfect to touch. Even the air smelled different here, like expensive perfume and polished surfaces, not the familiar scent of her mother's lavender sachets and Sunday dinners. "This will be your room for now," said Mara, a slim woman in a black pantsuit who hadn't smiled once since picking Ayanna up from the courthouse. She moved through the suite with quick, efficient steps, opening doors and flicking on lights, her heels clicking against marble in the bathroom. "The bathroom is through there. Fresh towels are laid out. Your father had some clothes brought up. If you need anything else, just use the house phone." Ayanna wrapped her arms around herself, still wearing the yellow dress from yesterday, now wrinkled and stained. The fabric that had once felt like love now just felt wrong against her skin. She longed for her own clothes, her own bed, her mother's gentle hands braiding her hair in the morning. The memory of those mornings, sitting between her mother's knees on the floor, the gentle tug of the comb, the stories they shared, made her throat tighten. "Are you hungry?" Mara asked, checking her phone. "The kitchen can prepare whatever you'd like: steak, salmon, pasta." Her voice trailed off as she scrolled through messages, clearly distracted by more important matters. "No, thank you," Ayanna said quietly. The words felt small in the vast suite. "You should eat something." Mara's tone was professional but distant, like a nurse with too many patients. "I'll have them send up a selection. Try to get comfortable. Your father will join you for dinner at 7. She glanced at her watch, already backing toward the door. Before Ayanna could protest, Mara was gone, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The sound echoed in the silence. 2 security guards stood stationed outside, for her protection, they'd said, but it felt more like being trapped. She tested the door handle after Mara left, just to be sure, and found it unlocked. But where would she go? She was 30 floors up in a strange city, miles from anything familiar. In the massive bathroom, Ayanna found shopping bags filled with new clothes, designer labels she'd only seen in magazines, soft sweaters in neutral colors, pressed slacks, shiny leather shoes. Nothing bright or cheerful like the dresses her mother made, nothing that felt like her. She ran her fingers over a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than their electric bill for 6 months, and felt nothing but emptiness. She changed into gray silk pajamas that probably cost more than their monthly rent back home. The material whispered against her skin as she moved, but it brought no comfort. It felt slippery and cold, nothing like the well-worn cotton nightgown waiting on her bed at home. At exactly 7, there was a knock at the door. Elijah Brooks entered, his suit perfectly pressed despite the long day. He carried himself with the same commanding presence she'd seen in the courtroom, but now he tried to soften it with what seemed like an attempt at a warm smile. His cologne filled the room, something expensive and masculine that made her think of boardrooms and power. "I hope you're settling in," he said, gesturing to a dining table that had been set with fine china and crystal glasses. "Shall we have dinner?" The chef prepared several options, since I wasn't sure what you'd prefer. Ayanna followed silently, sitting across from him as servers brought in covered dishes. The food looked elaborate and unfamiliar, nothing like her mother's cooking. No cornbread or collard greens, no sweet potato pie cooling on the counter. Just tiny portions arranged like artwork on oversized plates. "How do you like your classes at school?" Elijah asked, unfolding his napkin. "I understand you're quite good at mathematics." "Yes," Ayanna replied, pushing a piece of asparagus around her plate. The fork felt heavy in her hand. "And you tutor younger students?" His tone was careful, measured, like someone approaching a wild animal. "Yes." "That's very admirable." He paused, clearly searching for another topic. "Do you enjoy reading? I noticed you had a book with you yesterday." Ayanna looked up then, meeting his eyes directly. "Why didn't you come for me?" The question hung in the air between them. Elijah's practiced smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "That's complicated. There were many factors to consider. Political implications, timing." He cleared his throat. "The important thing is that you're safe now." But Ayanna wasn't listening anymore. Safe. She'd been safe with her mother. Safe in their small house with its creaky porch swing and garden full of zinnias. Safe in the community that had known her since birth, until yesterday, when everything changed. Safe meant being where you belonged, not sitting across from a stranger who shared your blood, but nothing else. Meanwhile, in Rosewood, Ruth Brooks walked up her driveway in the growing darkness. Her steps faltered at the sight of egg yolks dripping down her front door, shells scattered across the welcome mat. Cruel words had been scratched into the wood. Liar. The neighborhood that had embraced them for years now turned hostile overnight, as if her worth had vanished with her daughter. But it was the yellow dress that broke her. It lay crumpled on the porch railing where she'd left it that morning, now stained with dirt and tears from yesterday's ordeal. Ruth picked it up with trembling hands, pressing the fabric to her face. It still smelled faintly of Ayanna's coconut hair oil and the library's dusty books. She traced a finger along the hem she'd stitched by hand under the soft glow of her sewing lamp. She'd sewn this dress with such hope, such love, choosing the brightest yellow fabric because it matched her daughter's spirit. Every stitch had been a prayer for Ayanna's future. Now it felt like a reminder of everything she couldn't protect her child from. The world had always been ready to judge them, but she'd created a bubble of safety that had now been violently burst. Back in Atlanta, Ayanna stood before a full-length mirror in her hotel bedroom. The silk pajamas felt like a costume. The girl staring back at her looked lost, out of place among all this luxury. Everything around her was meant to be an upgrade. The clothes, the food, the view. But all she could think about was her small bedroom at home, walls covered in her drawings, the quilt her mother had made for her 6th birthday, the window that caught the morning sun just right. "I just want to go home," she whispered to her reflection, the words barely audible. Her breath fogged the mirror for just a moment before disappearing. The city lights twinkled beyond the window, beautiful but cold. Like everything else in this pristine prison of privilege. No one had asked what she wanted. No one had listened when she spoke. They'd swept her away from everything familiar, everything real, and called it a rescue. As if her life before had been something to escape from, not the foundation of everything she knew herself to be. In her mind, she could see her mother standing alone outside the courthouse, getting smaller and smaller as the SUV drove away. The image burned behind her eyes as she touched the cool glass of the mirror, her reflection blurring through tears she refused to let fall. She was her mother's daughter, strong, proud, dignified even in pain. That was something they couldn't take from her, no matter how high up they put her. The Atlanta Federal Courthouse loomed against the morning sky, its stone columns casting long shadows across the plaza. At precisely 10 a.m., Ruth Brooks stepped out of a black government vehicle, her navy blazer pressed and her head held high despite the exhaustion evident in her eyes. 2 federal agents flanked her as she climbed the courthouse steps, her sensible heels clicking against the marble. The weight of the situation pressed down on her shoulders, but she refused to let it show. Inside, the air felt thick with tension. Ruth's hands, usually steady from years of precise stitching, trembled slightly as she clutched her worn leather purse. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. The security escort guided her through metal detectors and down a series of sterile hallways until they reached Conference Room B. Each step felt heavier than the last. When the heavy wooden door swung open, Elijah Brooks rose from his seat at the polished conference table. His tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than 3 months of Ruth's salary. A gold watch glinted on his wrist, another reminder of the life he'd built without them. Their eyes met for the first time in 12 years, and the room seemed to crackle with unspoken accusations and buried memories. Ruth didn't acknowledge his gesture. She took her seat across the table, spine straight, arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her jaw clenched as she stared at the man who had once promised her the world. The federal mediator, a silver-haired woman in her 50s, with kind but tired eyes, cleared her throat and began reviewing the agenda in measured tones. Mr. Brooks has requested temporary guardianship of Ayanna during the ongoing investigation in Rosewood, the mediator explained, shuffling through her papers. We're here to discuss the terms and duration of this arrangement, considering the circumstances. No. Ruth's voice cut through the air like a knife. My daughter comes home with me, today. Her words left no room for negotiation, each syllable carved from 12 years of single motherhood. Elijah's perfectly composed expression cracked. A muscle twitched in his jaw. Ruth, be reasonable. Rosewood isn't safe right now. That corrupt deputy has already targeted her once. I can protect her in ways you can't. Don't you dare lecture me about what's safe for my child. Ruth's words dripped with venom. Where were you when she was learning to walk? When she had pneumonia at age 3? When she needed her father at every school play and every Sunday service? When she cried herself to sleep, wondering why her daddy didn't love her enough to stay? I never got your letter. Elijah's fist came down on the table, the sound echoing through the room. You can't punish me for something I didn't know about. How was I supposed to know I had a daughter if you kept her from me? Lies. Ruth's laugh was bitter and sharp, cutting through his excuses. I sent that letter certified mail. I called your office for weeks. Your assistant always said you were in meetings. Then suddenly your number changed. You knew, Elijah. You just didn't care enough to respond. The mediator tried to interject, her pen hovering over her notepad. Perhaps if we could focus on the present situation. But 12 years of pain had broken through the dam. Elijah stood, his carefully maintained control slipping. His eyes flashed with anger and something else. Guilt, perhaps. You made it crystal clear you didn't want my help. When I finally found out years later, your message was received. Stay away from your perfect little world. You didn't want me then, but now you need me. Perfect. Ruth's voice rose, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I worked 3 jobs. I sewed dresses until my fingers bled. I raised our daughter alone while you climbed your precious ladder. While you were shaking hands with senators, I was checking homework and paying bills with whatever was left in my wallet. And now she needs protection that only I can provide, Elijah shouted back, color rising in his face. You want to send her back to that backwards town where they're already painting her as a criminal? Where that deputy has already shown he'll target her? Think about Ayanna for once. That backwards town is her home. Those people are her community. Ruth's eyes flashed with maternal fury. You think you can sweep in with your fancy suits and federal badges and just take over? You don't even know her favorite color. Yellow, Elijah snapped, like the dress she was wearing when that bastard deputy arrested her. I notice things, Ruth, more than you give me credit for. Ruth's face went still, the fight momentarily draining from her. Number purple, like the flowers we plant every spring in our garden. The garden you've never seen. The garden she tends every weekend while you're giving press conferences. The mediator's pen scratched across her notepad as she tried again. Perhaps we could discuss a temporary arrangement. There's nothing to discuss. Elijah's voice was cold, the politician replacing the man. As U.S. Attorney General, I have legitimate concerns about my daughter's safety in Rosewood. Until the situation is fully investigated, she stays with me. That's final. You can't do this, Ruth whispered, but her voice gained strength with each word. You can't just appear after 12 years and take her away. She needs stability. She needs her home. She needs the people who've actually been there for her. She needs protection. Elijah's hand sliced through the air. And I can give her that now. I have resources you can't imagine. Connections that can keep her safe. Now, Ruth stood slowly, her eyes never leaving his. Now that it's convenient? Now that it fits your image? Now that having a daughter makes you look good to voters? Where was this concern when she cried herself to sleep asking why her daddy didn't want her? The mediator's attempts at intervention fell on deaf ears as years of hurt and anger filled the room. The morning dragged into afternoon, with neither parent willing to yield. Ruth refused to sign any temporary guardianship papers, her pen remaining untouched. Elijah refused to return Ayanna to Rosewood, citing security concerns that even Ruth couldn't completely dismiss. When they finally emerged from the conference room, Elijah's media team was waiting in the hallway. Cameras flashed as he stepped outside the courthouse, waving and offering practiced sound bites about ensuring his daughter's safety and investigating small-town corruption. His smile never reached his eyes. Ruth stood in the shadows of the courthouse entrance, watching the performance with a hollow feeling in her chest. Through the tinted windows of Elijah's waiting SUV, she could see Ayanna's face, still and unreadable, as she watched her father charm the reporters. The girl who had always worn her heart on her sleeve now wore a mask that matched her father's. In that moment, Ruth felt she was losing her daughter in more ways than one. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the private airstrip as Ayanna clutched her small suitcase with white-knuckled fingers. Federal agents flanked her like silent statues, their faces unreadable behind dark sunglasses, while a sleek jet waited on the tarmac, its engines humming with quiet power. She hadn't slept well in days, tossing and turning through nightmares she couldn't remember, and her stomach felt hollow despite the expensive breakfast Mara had ordered for her, fancy French toast that sat mostly untouched on fine china. "This way, Miss Brooks," Mara said, her heels clicking against the concrete like a metronome counting down the seconds. She wore a crisp navy suit without a single wrinkle and carried a tablet, tapping away at schedules and arrangements that would reshape Ayanna's life without her input or consent. Ayanna glanced back at Atlanta's skyline, the morning sun glinting off distant skyscrapers, knowing somewhere beyond it lay Rosewood and her mother. Her throat tightened with unshed tears. They hadn't let her call home since the courthouse, claiming it was for everyone's protection during the transition period. Words that felt like locks on an invisible cage. The flight to D.C. passed in a blur of clouds and silence that pressed against her ears. Ayanna pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the world slip away beneath her. Farms becoming tiny squares of green and brown, rivers turning to silver ribbons. A flight attendant with a practiced smile offered her fancy snacks on silver trays that she didn't touch. Mara spent the entire time on her phone, speaking in hushed tones about arrangements and protocols, as if Ayanna were a package to be delivered rather than a person. When they landed, more black SUVs waited in perfect formation. The convoy wound through the capital's streets, past monuments and government buildings that seemed to loom over her like stone giants. They finally stopped at Veritas Academy, a sprawling campus of red brick and ivy-covered walls that looked more like a fortress than a school. "Your father has arranged everything," Mara explained, leading her through massive wooden doors that groaned on ancient hinges. "Veritas is the most prestigious school in the district. Many children of prominent officials attend here. You'll be in good company." The halls gleamed with polished marble that reflected her uncertain face. Trophy cases lined the walls, filled with academic awards and debate team victories behind spotless glass. Everything smelled like furniture polish and old books and money. A group of students in pressed uniforms passed by, giving her curious looks and whispers behind cupped hands. "First, we'll get you fitted," Mara continued, steering her toward a room where an elderly woman waited with measuring tape and pins in a cushioned box. "Then we'll review your class schedule. Your father has requested you be placed in advanced courses. He's very confident in your abilities." Ayanna stood still as the seamstress took measurements, feeling like a doll being dressed up for display at a fancy store. The uniform was navy and cream, with a blazer that felt stiff and foreign on her shoulders, nothing like the comfortable clothes she was used to wearing. "Arms up, dear," the seamstress instructed, pinning the sides of the skirt with practiced precision. Ayanna complied mechanically, remembering how different it felt when her mother measured her for the yellow dress. Ruth would hum hymns while she worked, her voice soft and soothing, let Ayanna pick the fabric from colorful bolts, ask her opinion on every detail as if her thoughts truly mattered. The morning blurred into afternoon like watercolors mixing on wet paper. Mara led her through a maze of requirements: student handbook rules, classroom locations, expected behaviors. Everything was decided, scheduled, controlled, down to the minute. "Your father will be giving a press conference at 2, Mara mentioned, checking her watch with a quick flick of her wrist. "You can watch from the student lounge if you'd like. Many are expecting it." Ayanna didn't respond, but found herself in front of a large TV screen anyway, guided there by hands that weren't her own. Other students gathered around, whispering and pointing when they recognized Elijah Brooks at the podium, his face serious and composed. He stood tall and commanding, his voice carrying authority as he addressed the reporters crowded before him. "In these challenging times, we must focus on protecting our youth, ensuring they have access to the best opportunities this nation can provide. The next generation deserves nothing less than our full commitment to their safety and success." The words rang hollow in Ayanna's ears, empty as a drum. He spoke about children like statistics, not people with hearts and dreams. Not once did he mention her name or acknowledge why he was really there. It was all performance, carefully scripted to advance his image while she sat trapped in a strange place, cut off from everything she knew and loved. When evening came, shadows stretching across manicured lawns, Ayanna was shown to her dorm suite. It was larger than her bedroom at home, with expensive furniture of dark wood and a private bathroom with marble countertops. But it felt cold, impersonal, like a hotel room nobody lived in. The walls were bare white, waiting to be filled with a life she hadn't chosen and didn't want. She tried calling her mother again, fingers trembling as she dialed, but Mara intercepted with a gentle but firm hand. "I'm sorry, but all communication needs to go through proper channels right now. We'll establish appropriate contact protocols soon. It's for security reasons." Left alone at last, the door clicking shut behind Mara's departing figure, Ayanna began unpacking her suitcase. Her hands trembled as she pulled out clothes and books, each item a small piece of home. At the bottom, tucked between her sweaters, she found her worn Bible, its pages soft from years of turning. A familiar floral scarf was wrapped around it, her mother's favorite, the one she wore to church every Sunday, smelling faintly of lavender and home. A small note fell out, written in her mother's careful handwriting. "Remember who you are. Love, Mama." Tears spilled onto the pages as Ayanna pressed the Bible and scarf to her chest, the dam finally breaking. They smelled like home, like her mother's gentle hugs and quiet strength when the world got too loud. She could almost hear Ruth's voice reading Psalms with her before bed, the soft lamp casting warm shadows across their faces. Finally, she pulled out the yellow dress, now wrinkled from being stuffed in the suitcase. The fabric still held traces of that terrible day. A small tear near the hem where it caught on something. A faint stain from the police car floor. But it was also filled with love, with her mother's careful stitches and proud smile when Ayanna first tried it on, twirling in front of their cracked bathroom mirror. Sitting on the edge of her new bed, the mattress too soft and unfamiliar, Ayanna hugged the dress close against her heart. The room felt vast and empty around her, like being lost in space. A covered dinner tray sat untouched on the desk, some elaborate meal with fancy sauces she couldn't bring herself to eat. Outside her window, DCS lights twinkled like cold stars, so different from Rosewood's warm glow that seemed to embrace rather than intimidate. She closed her eyes tight, clutching the yellow dress like a lifeline to a world that seemed to be slipping away. Sleep wouldn't come, but she held on to these pieces of home, these fragments of who she was before the world turned upside down. In the silence, broken only by the occasional distant siren, she felt further from herself than ever before, a stranger in her own skin. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Ayanna's dorm room, casting long shadows across the untouched breakfast tray Mara had delivered. Steam rose from a bowl of steel-cut oatmeal topped with fresh berries and honey, the kind of breakfast Ayanna would have once dreamed about back in Rosewood. Now it just made her stomach turn. The mere thought of eating felt impossible, like trying to swallow stones. "You need to eat something," Mara said, her voice carrying that familiar mix of efficiency and forced warmth. She stood by the door in her perfectly pressed suit, tapping notes into her tablet. "Your first class starts in 45 minutes. Her fingers moved rapidly across the screen, checking off another task on her endless list of responsibilities regarding Elijah Brooks' newly discovered daughter. Ayanna sat on the edge of her bed, already dressed in her new Veritas Academy uniform. A crisp navy blazer with gold buttons and a pleated skirt that felt stiff and foreign against her skin. The uniform had been tailored perfectly to her measurements, yet somehow felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. She stared at the breakfast tray, but made no move toward it. "I'm not hungry," she said quietly, her words barely above a whisper, disappearing into the vast emptiness of the room. Mara sighed and checked her watch. "The car will be here in 30 minutes. Please try to eat something before then." There was a hint of genuine concern beneath her professional detachment, but not enough to bridge the gulf between them. The door clicked shut behind her, and Ayanna was alone again. She picked up her leather messenger bag, another new gift from Elijah, and checked that her mother's scarf was still tucked safely inside. The soft fabric was the only familiar thing in this strange new world, a small piece of home she could touch whenever the loneliness threatened to overwhelm her. At Veritas Academy, the halls gleamed with polished marble and old money. Students moved in tight clusters, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings. They cast curious glances at Ayanna as she passed, whispering behind manicured hands. Some pointed subtly, others stared openly at the Attorney General's mysterious new daughter. She kept her eyes forward, counting steps to her next class, finding rhythm in the numbers to drown out their whispers. In advanced literature, Mrs. Winchester called on her to analyze a passage from The Great Gatsby. The classroom fell silent, all eyes turning toward the new girl. "Miss Brooks," she said, peering over her reading glasses, "what do you make of Gatsby's Pursuit of Daisy?" Ayanna knew the answer. She'd read the book twice already back home, but her voice came out measured and distant. He chased an idea more than a person. He wanted what she represented. She paused, then added softly, "Sometimes people love the image of something more than the reality." The teacher nodded, impressed but unsettled by the gravity in Ayanna's tone. Other students shifted in their seats, uncertain how to react to this strange new classmate, who spoke like someone much older than 12. A few exchanged glances, eyebrows raised at the unexpected depth of her answer. In each class it was the same. Ayanna answered when called upon, her responses always correct, but delivered with a detachment that made teachers exchange worried glances. During lunch, she sat alone, picking at her food and reading her worn copy of Anne of Green Gables. The book's pages were dog-eared and familiar, a story about another orphan trying to find her place in the world. Miles away, in his corner office at the Justice Department, Elijah Brooks paced behind his desk. His chief of staff, Marcus Wheeler, sat reviewing the latest reports from Veritas Academy. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the American flag standing proudly in the corner. "She's not engaging," Elijah said, frustration evident in his voice. "The teachers say she's brilliant but withdrawn. This isn't the image we need right now." He ran a hand through his perfectly groomed hair, a rare sign of agitation from the normally composed Attorney General. Marcus adjusted his glasses. "Sir, perhaps she needs time to process everything. The transition has been sudden." "She's at the best school in D.C., Elijah cut in. "She has everything she could want. What's there to process?" He gestured at the window, at the power and privilege that surrounded them. Most kids would be thrilled with this opportunity. The school counselor suggested bringing in a child psychologist. Elijah waved his hand dismissively. "She doesn't need therapy. She just needs to adjust." He straightened his tie in the reflection of his window. "Schedule a photo op at the school next week. Something casual. Me helping her with homework, maybe. We need to show this is working." His reflection stared back at him, confident and commanding, revealing nothing of the uncertainty that occasionally gripped him in quiet moments. That evening, alone in her dorm room, Ayanna sat cross-legged on her bed with her laptop open. The screen glowed with YouTube videos of her father's speeches. She clicked through them one by one, studying the man who had suddenly claimed her as his daughter. She searched his face for any resemblance to her own, for any clue to the connection they supposedly shared. "Justice isn't just a word," Elijah's voice rang out from the speakers. "It's a promise we make to our children. Justice starts at home." Ayanna's finger hovered over the pause button. She pressed it, freezing her father's face mid-sentence. In the video, he looked passionate, convincing, every inch the powerful man who commanded respect in Washington's halls of power. His eyes burned with conviction that seemed so genuine it made her chest ache. "Then why didn't you come home?" she whispered to the frozen image. The words fell into the empty room, met only by silence. The question hung in the air, unanswered, and perhaps unanswerable. Her eyes drifted to the window, where the D.C. skyline sparkled against the darkening sky. The Washington Monument stood like a silent sentinel in the distance, its white stone catching the last rays of sunset. Everything in this city seemed designed to impress, to project power and importance. Every building, every person, every gesture calculated for maximum effect. Ayanna closed her laptop slowly, the soft click echoing in the quiet room. Her reflection in the window looked back at her, a small figure in expensive new clothes, surrounded by luxury but feeling more alone than ever. The silence that had started as a shield against fear in that holding cell back in Rosewood had transformed into something else now. It wasn't fear keeping her quiet anymore. It was the growing certainty that in this world of powerful men and careful image management, her voice wouldn't matter, even if she used it. She touched the window glass, cool against her fingertips. Somewhere out there, her mother was probably sitting in their small kitchen, maybe working on a new dress, maybe praying. Ayanna wondered if her mother felt this same silence too, this same hollowness that no amount of luxury could fill. The night settled around her like a heavy blanket. She didn't cry. She hadn't since that first day in the police car. Instead, she sat very still, watching the city lights blink on one by one, each one as distant and unreachable as her father's heart. In the darkness of her room, she made a silent promise to herself that someday, somehow, she would find her voice again. The morning light streamed through the tall windows of Veritas Academy, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Ayanna walked through the hushed hallway, her footsteps echoing softly against the walls. Other students parted around her like water around a stone, their whispers following in her wake, cutting through the silence like paper cuts. "There goes the ghost," someone murmured, not quite quiet enough. The nickname had stuck after her first silent week at the academy. Ayanna kept her chin up, just like her mother had taught her. "Don't let them see you bend," Ruth had whispered while straightening Ayanna's tie that first morning. Her backpack felt heavy against her shoulders, weighted down with textbooks and expectations she never asked for. The uniform blazer was still stiff, the collar too tight around her neck, like hands trying to choke her voice away. During study period, she sat alone at a corner table in the library, methodically working through her advanced algebra problems. The scratch of her pencil was the only sound she allowed herself to make these days. Words had become dangerous things, weapons that could be twisted and turned against her family. Mara's heels clicked against the floor as she approached, tablet in one hand and a sleek black phone in the other. Her father's assistant never smiled, never frowned. "Your father," she said quietly, extending the phone with perfectly manicured fingers. Ayanna's hand trembled slightly as she took it. "Hello?" "Don't watch the news." Elijah's voice came through, clipped and businesslike. "No greeting, no, how are you? There's been a development. Focus on your studies. Everything else is being handled." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Ayanna handed the phone back to Mara, her face carefully blank, but her heart hammered in her chest. She knew that tone. It was the same one he'd used in the courthouse, right before everything changed, right before her life split into before and after. By lunchtime, the whispers had grown louder. Students huddled around their phones in the cafeteria, shooting furtive glances her way. They looked like hungry birds, pecking at crumbs of gossip. Ayanna caught fragments of conversations as she passed. Federal investigation, abuse of power, her father. In her next class, advanced literature, she couldn't focus on the discussion of To Kill a Mockingbird. The irony wasn't lost on her. A story about injustice and a father fighting for what's right. Except in her case, what was right wasn't so clear. Two girls in front of her kept showing each other something on a hidden phone screen, giggling nervously, their shoulders hunched in secrecy. Finally, during her free period, Ayanna slipped into the computer lab and opened a news website. Her stomach dropped as she read the headlines, each one a hammer blow. Breaking: Memo reveals A.G. Brooks' interference in daughter's case. Sources claim federal pressure on local judge. Questions raised about dropped charges in Georgia. Her father's face was everywhere, stern and commanding in his press photos. The same face that had burst into that small-town courtroom, the face that had promised safety, but delivered only silence. Not once had he asked what she wanted. Through the lab's window, she could see news vans gathering at the school gates like vultures circling. Reporters with cameras stood in clusters, probably hoping to catch a glimpse of her. The sight made her feel sick, like she was both invisible and too visible at the same time. Back in class, she heard a boy whisper to his friend, "My dad says her father's going down for this. Says he strong-armed that judge in Georgia, used his position to make it all go away." Ayanna gripped her pencil tighter, focusing on her breathing, like her mother had taught her during their Sunday morning prayers. In, out, in, out. The wooden pencil creaked under the pressure of her fingers. The afternoon crawled by in a blur of sidelong glances and hushed conversations. Her phone buzzed once with a message from Mara. "Car will pick you up at alternate entrance. Security concerns." No explanation, no comfort, just logistics. As she was escorted to the waiting black SUV, she caught glimpses of protest signs through the tinted windows. Bold letters demanded truth, accountability, resignation. The drive to her father's residence was tense and silent. The security detail spoke in clipped tones through their earpieces about crowd control and perimeter checks, as if they were guarding a president, not a 12-year-old girl. From her window seat, Ayanna watched her father on the car's built-in TV screen, standing at a podium surrounded by flags. His voice filled the vehicle, confident and unwavering. These allegations are nothing more than a politically motivated attack. My actions in Georgia were those of a father protecting his child from a grave injustice. I will not apologize for ensuring my daughter's safety. Ayanna noticed he still hadn't said her name. She was just my daughter, a prop in his defense. The SUV took a back route to avoid the main entrance where protesters had gathered. Their chants could be heard even through the thick windows. "Resign! Resign!" The words pounded against the glass like angry fists. In her dorm room that evening, Ayanna stood at the window, watching the crowd below. Their signs bobbed like angry waves in the gathering darkness. News cameras flashed like lightning. The glass fogged with her breath as she stood there, silent and still, a sentinel watching her own story unfold without her. Her reflection stared back at her, a girl in a pristine uniform, hair perfectly braided, shoulders straight. But her eyes looked different now, older, harder. Not the eyes of a 12-year-old who had tutored second graders in a small-town library just weeks ago. These were eyes that had seen too much, understood too much. The chanting grew louder. "Resign! Resign!" Ayanna didn't cry. She hadn't cried since that day in the holding cell. Instead, she watched her reflection and thought about her mother's words from their last Sunday service together. Sometimes God's greatest tests come disguised as answers to our prayers. She had prayed for her father to come back into her life. Now he had, bringing a storm with him. The protesters' voices rose into the night air, a chorus of anger and demand. Through the fog on the window, Ayanna's reflection looked back at her, wearing the face of someone who had learned too young that justice and truth weren't always the same thing, and that sometimes the people who claim to protect you are the ones who hurt you most. The sharp knocks jolted Ruth from her fitful sleep. Through her bedroom window, the Georgia sun was just beginning to paint the sky in soft pinks and oranges. Her heart jumped at the sound. No one came calling this early unless something was wrong. A sense of dread settled in her stomach as she pushed back her quilt. She pulled on her robe, smoothed her hair with trembling fingers, and made her way downstairs. The knocking continued, more insistent now, echoing through the quiet house like a warning. Two men in crisp, dark suits stood on her porch, their government-issued SUV parked in her driveway. Their faces were expressionless, all business. "Mrs. Brooks?" the taller one asked, his voice flat and official. "We have a delivery for you." His eyes never quite met hers. Ruth's fingers trembled as she accepted the thick envelope, its weight seeming to pull her down. The word subpoena stood out in bold letters, black and accusing. "You are hereby commanded to appear before the Congressional Ethics Committee." The formal language felt cold and threatening. The words blurred together as her vision swam. She was being summoned to Washington to testify about Elijah, about their past, about everything she'd kept private for 12 years. All the secrets she'd buried to protect her daughter were about to be dragged into the harsh light. "You'll need to sign here," the shorter agent said, holding out a clipboard, his tone suggesting this was routine for him. Ruth signed mechanically, her signature shaky and uncertain, barely recognizable as her own. As soon as they left, their car pulling away with military precision, she sank into her kitchen chair, the subpoena heavy in her hands like a stone. The morning light caught the silver cross hanging on her wall, making it gleam. She'd always found comfort in that cross, in her faith, but today it offered no peace. Even prayer felt distant. With trembling fingers, she dialed Deacon Henry's number. It rang 4 times before his deep, familiar voice answered, bringing a small measure of comfort. "Sister Ruth, what's wrong?" Concern filled his voice. He knew she wouldn't call this early without reason. "They're calling me to testify," she whispered, the words catching in her throat. "About Elijah, about everything." There was a long pause. heavy with understanding. Federal subpoena? Yes. The single word carried all her fear. Lord have mercy, he sighed, and she could picture him removing his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This is beyond my expertise, Sister Ruth. This is federal now. They've got the power to compel your testimony. There's no running from this. Ruth closed her eyes, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. What do I do? Tell the truth, he said simply. That's all any of us can do. The Lord sees your heart. By noon, the quiet street outside her house had transformed into a circus. News vans lined the curb, their satellite dishes reaching skyward. Reporters standing in her yard with microphones ready, trampling her carefully tended flower beds. Ruth drew her curtains against their prying eyes, but their voices still carried through the walls like persistent ghosts. Sitting alone in her kitchen, memories washed over her like waves she couldn't outrun. That night 12 years ago felt so vivid now. The same kitchen table, the same chair, but a younger Ruth with fewer worry lines etched on her face. She'd had the letter in her hands, the one telling Elijah about their baby, about Ayanna, the letter that could have changed everything. The memory played out like a movie she couldn't stop, her fingers smoothing the paper, checking the address one last time. His name rising in politics already, his face in the papers with that confident smile, the fear gripping her heart, fear of scandal, of rejection, of her child being used as a political weapon or worse, discarded as an inconvenience. In the end, she'd torn the letter to pieces, letting them fall like snow into the trash, each piece carrying away a different future. She'd protect their baby herself, keep her safe, private, away from the harsh spotlight that followed Elijah Brooks. Now, watching reporters trample her flowers outside, Ruth realized with bitter clarity that there was no such thing as private anymore. Not for her, not for Ayanna. Miles away in Washington, Ayanna sat cross-legged on her dorm room floor, eyes fixed on the flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. Her own face stared back at her from news broadcasts. School photos, security camera footage from that day at the courthouse, shaky cell phone videos of her being escorted into Veritas Academy. It was surreal, seeing herself discussed by strangers who knew nothing about her real thoughts or feelings. The Brooks scandal continues to unfold, a reporter announced, her perfect hair not moving despite the breeze. Sources suggest the Attorney General may have leveraged federal authority to intervene in a local matter, using his newly discovered daughter as a sympathy play. Another channel, another face talking about her life. Questions arise about the timing of this revelation. Was this young girl nothing more than a political pawn? Ayanna's chest felt tight, each breath shallow and painful. The words "political pawn" echoed in her head like a cruel taunt. Is that all she was? A piece in someone else's game? A prop in her father's political theater? She looked down at her homework. Advanced algebra problems that suddenly seemed meaningless, trivial in the face of her crumbling identity. The perfectly sharpened pencils, the crisp notebook paper, the expensive textbooks with their glossy covers, all of it felt false. Like props in a play she never agreed to perform in, costumes for a role she never auditioned for. Something snapped inside her, a dam breaking after weeks of pressure. With a cry of frustration that came from deep in her soul, she grabbed her homework and tore it in half, then again, and again. The sound of ripping paper filled the room as she shredded every assignment, every pristine page, watching the pieces flutter to the carpet. Her textbooks followed, crashing to the floor with satisfying thuds. Months of careful studying, of trying to be perfect, of trying to be what everyone wanted. It all felt like a lie, a performance for people who didn't really see her. The energy drained from her as quickly as it had come, leaving her hollow. Ayanna slid down beside her bed, curling into herself on the plush carpet. Her throat felt raw, her eyes burning with tears she refused to shed. She was tired of crying, tired of feeling lost. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered to the empty room, the words barely audible even to herself. The torn papers lay scattered around her like fallen leaves, evidence of her momentary rebellion, and somewhere in Georgia, her mother sat alone in a kitchen full of memories, both of them caught in a storm neither had created, both of them losing pieces of themselves with each passing day, struggling to hold on to what mattered most. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of Elijah's home office, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floor. Ayanna stood in the doorway, her school uniform still crisp despite the long day of classes. She needed a stapler for her history project, and Mara had told her to check the office while taking a phone call in the hallway. The office felt cold and impersonal, like everything else in this new life. Dark wooden bookshelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound law books and political biographies. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface neat and organized with everything in its proper place. Pens aligned, papers squared, not a speck of dust anywhere. Ayanna moved quietly, her feet silent on the expensive Persian rug. She opened the top drawer, pens, paper clips, but no stapler. The second drawer held files, all labeled with perfect precision in crisp black ink. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the carefully curated photographs on the walls, Elijah shaking hands with politicians, receiving awards, standing at podiums with perfect posture and practiced smiles. Not a single personal photo among them. No family, no memories, just accomplishments. A small wooden desk organizer caught her attention. Inside, nestled among paper clips and rubber bands, she spotted a small silver key that gleamed in the sunlight. Something tugged at her mind as she picked it up, remembering the bottom drawer she'd noticed earlier, the only one with a lock. Her fingers closed around the cool metal, hesitating. Through the open door, she could hear Mara's voice, still deep in conversation about scheduling and press statements. "Yes, we'll need to coordinate with the senator's office before making any announcements." Ayanna's heart beat faster as she knelt beside the drawer. The key slid in perfectly with a satisfying fit. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside, unlike the pristine organization above, papers were stuffed haphazardly, as if someone had wanted to hide them quickly, shoving them out of sight and out of mind. But what caught her eye was a worn envelope, yellowed with age, tucked beneath everything else like a secret meant to be forgotten. Her hands trembled as she pulled it out. The postmark was from Rosewood, dated over a decade ago. She recognized her mother's careful handwriting immediately, though it looked younger somehow, less weathered by time. The loops of the letters were more hopeful, less cautious. Ayanna glanced toward the door. Mara's voice continued, distant and distracted. With trembling fingers, she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside, the paper crackling softly with age. "Dear Elijah, I write this on the day of your confirmation as Attorney General. I watched the ceremony on television. You spoke about justice and truth, about doing what's right even when it's hard. Those words echo in my ears as I look at our daughter sleeping in the next room. She's beautiful, Elijah. She has your eyes and my mother's smile. She's brilliant beyond her years, reading at 5, asking questions that leave her teachers stammering. Sometimes when she's deep in thought, she gets that same crease between her eyebrows that you always had when you were studying. I don't want anything from you. We made our choices long ago, and I've made peace with mine. But your daughter deserves to know your name. She deserves to understand where she comes from. Every time she asks about her father, I see the hurt in her eyes that I can't erase. I'm not asking you to upend your life. I'm not asking for recognition or support. I'm only asking you to acknowledge that she exists, to give her the simple dignity of knowing her father's name. She deserves that much truth." Ayanna read the words again, then a third time, her fingers brushing over her mother's signature. Tears fell onto the paper, but she barely noticed them, small droplets blurring the ink in places. All this time, she'd carried so much anger at her mother for keeping secrets, at Elijah for suddenly claiming her when it served his purposes. But now, holding this letter, everything shifted into sharp focus, like a camera lens finally finding clarity. Her mother had tried. She'd reached out, offering Elijah a chance to know his daughter without demanding anything in return. And he'd buried the letter in a locked drawer, hiding it away like all his other inconvenient truths, choosing his career over even the smallest acknowledgement of her existence. The anger didn't vanish, but it transformed into something else, something clearer and more purposeful. She wasn't just a scandal to be managed, or a political asset to be protected. She was a person with her own story, her own truth, her own right to be known and seen. Carefully, she folded the letter along its worn creases, smoothing each edge with gentle fingers. From the hallway, Mara's voice grew closer, wrapping up her call. Ayanna slipped the letter into her backpack and zipped it closed. Her movements were deliberate, calm, practiced, as if she'd been preparing for this moment her whole life. When she stood, her reflection in the office window showed a face transformed, not by rage or hurt, but by absolute clarity. Her eyes burned with quiet determination, holding a truth that neither parent could hide anymore. In that moment, she looked older, steadier, more certain of herself than she had been just minutes before. Ayanna? Mara appeared in the doorway, phone still in hand. "Did you find the stapler?" "No," Ayanna replied, her voice steady and clear as a bell. "I don't think it's in here." She shouldered her backpack, feeling the weight of the letter inside. It wasn't just paper she carried now. It was proof that her story was her own to tell. And someday, soon, she would. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Elijah's study, casting harsh light on three people who had never sat in the same room together. Ayanna perched on the edge of a leather armchair, her school uniform perfectly pressed, her spine straight as a rod. To her left, Ruth sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, wearing a simple navy dress that seemed out of place among the study's opulent decor. Elijah stood by his desk, one hand resting on its polished surface as if seeking stability. The silence felt like a physical weight. Outside, birds chirped in the manicured garden, oblivious to the tension within. A grandfather clock in the corner ticked away precious seconds. None of them seemed to know how to begin. Ayanna reached into her backpack and pulled out the letter. The paper was worn at the edges, yellowed with age. She placed it deliberately in the center of the coffee table between them. The sound of paper meeting wood echoed in the quiet room. "You both had a chance," Ayanna said, her voice steady and clear. "Neither of you took it." Ruth's fingers twitched in her lap. Elijah's shoulders tensed. The letter lay between them like a live wire. "Baby, I was scared," Ruth said softly. Her voice trembled slightly. "I wrote that letter the day he became Attorney General. I watched him on TV giving his acceptance speech, talking about justice and family values." She swallowed hard. "I was afraid he'd reject us both." "I never saw that letter," Elijah cut in, his tone defensive. "If I had known..." "Don't." Ruth's voice turned sharp. "Don't you dare pretend. Your office confirmed receipt. I have the certified mail slip at home. My staff handles thousands of letters. And they just happened to lose the one from the woman you left behind." Ruth's careful composure cracked. "The one carrying your child?" "You made it clear you didn't want me involved." Elijah's voice rose. "You wouldn't take my calls, wouldn't let me explain." "Explain what?" Ruth stood up, hands clenched. "How you disappeared the moment your political career took off. How you never once looked back. I tried to send money." "We didn't need your money." Ruth's eyes flashed. Ayanna needed her father. "Stop it!" Ayanna's voice cut through their argument like a blade. Both adults turned to look at their daughter, startled by her outburst. She stood now, too, trembling but determined. "This isn't about either of you," she said, each word precise and weighted. This is about me. About the girl who grew up wondering why her father never wanted to know her. About the daughter who watched her mother cry at night when she thought I was sleeping. Ruth sank back into her chair, face pale. Elijah took a step forward, then stopped, uncertain. I had to learn about my father from newspaper articles, Ayanna continued. I had to pretend I didn't care when other kids talked about their dads. And now, you both want to fight about who hurt who? She shook her head. What about how you hurt me? The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Elijah moved to speak, but Ayanna held up her hand. Mama, you should have sent that letter sooner. You should have tried harder to tell him. Her voice softened as she looked at her mother. And Daddy. The word felt strange in her mouth. Even if you never got the letter, you knew. Somewhere inside, you knew I existed. But your career was more important. Ruth wiped a tear from her cheek. Elijah's face had gone ashen. And now? Ayanna gestured around the study. Now I'm just a problem you both need to solve. A scandal to manage. A custody battle to win. Her voice caught slightly, but she pressed on. But I'm not a problem. I'm your daughter, and neither of you seems to understand what that really means. The grandfather clock continued its steady rhythm, marking time in a room where time seemed to stand still. The morning sun had shifted, casting shadows where there had been light. The letter remained untouched on the table, its edges curling slightly in the air conditioning. Ayanna looked between her parents, her mother, who had raised her with fierce love but also fear, and her father, who had claimed her only when circumstances forced his hand. Neither met her eyes. Without another word, Ayanna turned and walked out of the study. The door closed behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo through the silence she left behind. Elijah sank into his chair, putting his face in his hands. Ruth remained seated, as still as a statue, her eyes fixed on some distant point. Between them, the letter lay on the table like a verdict neither was ready to accept. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed once, its lonely tone echoing through Elijah's darkened DC townhouse. Ayanna lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with the day's confrontation. Sleep wouldn't come. The letter's words kept floating through her thoughts, along with the pain in both her parents' eyes. She sat up slowly, pushing aside the silk sheets. The plush carpet muffled her bare feet as she crept to her door and listened. Silence. Even Mara had gone home hours ago. The hallway stretched before her like a tunnel, moonlight filtering through tall windows. Family photos lined the walls, all recent additions since her arrival, carefully arranged to show a false history that never existed. Ayanna moved past them without looking. The study door was unlocked. She slipped inside, careful not to let it creak. The room smelled of leather and expensive cologne. A half-empty coffee cup sat on Elijah's desk beside stacks of legal briefs. Her fingers traced the edge of his chair, remembering how he'd acted earlier that day. Defensive, guarded, more worried about appearances than truth. But it was something else she remembered now. Last week, while struggling through algebra homework, she'd glimpsed him standing at the back wall. He'd thought she was focused on her textbook, but she'd watched through lowered lashes as he pressed something, opened a panel, and quickly locked it again. His movements had been furtive, practiced. Ayanna moved to the wood-paneled wall, running her fingertips along the surface. In the darkness, she had to rely on touch. The grain felt smooth, expensive. She pressed gently, methodically, working her way across until, there. A slight give under her fingers, followed by a soft click. The panel swung open silently on hidden hinges. Behind it sat a sleek metal case, its surface reflecting the dim light from the window. Ayanna's heart pounded as she lifted it out. She expected it to be locked, but the latch opened easily. Perhaps Elijah had grown careless, thinking no one would find this hiding place. Inside, manila folders were stacked neatly, each marked with red confidential stamps. Ayana's hands trembled as she lifted them out one by one, scanning the labels by moonlight. The last folder was thicker than the others, dated just 3 months ago. She opened it carefully, spreading the contents on the carpet. Her eyes widened as she read. Page after page of emails, court documents, and financial records painted a clear picture. Deputy Rourke's name appeared repeatedly, linked to private juvenile detention centers across 3 states. There were lists of falsified charges, identical to what she'd been accused of, targeting specific demographics, bank transfers, kickbacks, a whole system designed to funnel innocent kids into for-profit facilities. Ayana's stomach clenched as she recognized other names from Rosewood, kids who'd disappeared into the system, families who'd been powerless to fight back. The evidence was overwhelming. This wasn't just about her case. It was about dozens of children, maybe hundreds, all caught in the same cruel web. She checked the time, 1:47 a.m. The house remained silent. With trembling fingers, she slipped the entire folder into her school backpack, carefully returning the others to their original positions. The case went back exactly as she'd found it. The panel clicked shut. Her bare feet made no sound as she padded back to her room, but her heart thundered so loudly she feared it would wake the whole house. Once inside, she closed her door with excruciating slowness, waiting until the latch caught before releasing her held breath. The folder seemed to burn through her backpack as she set it down. From another pocket, she pulled out her mother's letter, the one that had started all of this. The 2 documents lay side by side on her desk, one filled with a mother's hope and pain from the past, the other exposing a present darkness that had nearly swallowed her whole. "One for the past," she whispered, touching the letter. "One for the future." The morning sun hadn't yet cleared the Capitol dome when Ayana smoothed her plaid uniform skirt and checked her reflection one final time. Her pressed curls were neat, her tie straight, her white collar crisp. She looked exactly like what everyone expected. The perfect political daughter, controlled and contained. Inside her leather backpack, beneath her mother's worn Bible, lay the stolen file. Her hands didn't shake anymore when she touched it. The truth had weight, but it wasn't heavy, not like the silence had been. Mara knocked on her door promptly at 6:45 a.m., clipboard in hand as always. "Ready for school, Miss Brooks?" "Actually," Ayana said, her voice steady and clear. "I'd like to see my father this morning, at his office." Mara checked her schedule, frowning slightly. "He has meetings all day." "Just to say good morning," Ayana added, allowing a small, practiced smile. "He mentioned wanting me to feel more involved." The words were carefully chosen, echoing Elijah's own frequent comments about family integration. Mara's expression softened, exactly as Ayana had known it would. "Well, I suppose a quick visit wouldn't hurt. The car's waiting." The black SUV wound through DC's morning traffic, past early joggers and coffee shops just opening their doors. Ayana sat quietly, watching the Justice Department building grow larger through the tinted windows. Her heart beat steadily. This wasn't fear, this was purpose. The security guards nodded respectfully as she passed through the metal detectors. "Morning, Miss Brooks." They knew her now, the Attorney General's daughter. No one questioned why she was there. "I'll wait here," Mara said, settling into a lobby chair with her phone. "Don't be too long. First period starts at 8. Ayana walked toward the bank of elevators, waited until Mara was absorbed in her emails, then turned left instead of right. Janet Keyes' office was on the 3rd floor. Ayana had memorized the location during a school field trip last week. The journalist had given a passionate speech about truth and accountability that day. Ayana had paid very close attention. The halls were still mostly empty this early. Her footsteps echoed slightly on the marble floors as she found the right door. The nameplate read, "Janet Keyes, Investigative Correspondent." The office beyond was dark, but that didn't matter. Ayana slipped the manila folder from her bag and pushed it through the mail slot. She didn't leave a note. The evidence would speak for itself. Walking back, she passed a wall of framed quotes about justice. One caught her eye. "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." She paused, touched the glass briefly, then continued on. "Ready?" Mara asked when Ayana returned to the lobby. "Did you see your father?" "He was busy," Ayana said softly. "But that's okay. He'll know I was here soon enough." The day passed in a blur of classes and whispers. Ayana took notes, raised her hand when called on, ate lunch alone as usual. But inside, beneath the careful mask, she felt like a countdown had started. Tick, tick, tick. At 4:07 p.m., her phone buzzed with a news alert, then another, and another. Breaking. Major corruption scandal rocks. Georgia justice system. Exclusive. Documents reveal systematic abuse in juvenile courts. Developing. Multiple officials implicated in prison-for-profit scheme. The headlines kept coming. Janet Key's byline led every story. The evidence was comprehensive, damning, and absolutely clear. Deputy Rourke's name appeared again and again, along with judges, court officials, and private detention center executives. The whole corrupt machine laid bare. By dinner time, the story had exploded across every major network. Ayana sat at Elijah's formal dining table, watching him watch the coverage on his phone. His face grew darker with each scroll, each new revelation. She took small, careful bites of her salmon, waiting. Finally, he set the phone down. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. "Did you do this?" His voice was very quiet. Ayana set her fork down precisely, meeting his gaze. She saw the politician there, the powerful man who could bend systems to his will. But she also saw something else, uncertainty. For the first time, he wasn't controlling the narrative. "I did what neither of you would," she said calmly. "I stood up." The words hung in the air between them, clear and uncompromising. In them lay every silent dinner, every avoided conversation, every moment she'd been treated like a problem to manage rather than a daughter to love. But there was something else too, strength, not learned from him or his world of power plays and careful calculations, but from somewhere deeper, somewhere true. The Sunday morning news shows buzzed with manufactured outrage. On every channel, talking heads dissected the leaked email that supposedly proved Elijah Brooks had orchestrated everything. The crawling headlines felt like poison. A G. Brooks accused of staging daughter's arrest. Sources questioned timing of corruption exposure. Was Ayana Brooks just a PR prop? In her hotel room, Ayana sat cross-legged on the bed, watching the coverage with quiet intensity. The lies didn't hurt as much as she expected. What stung was how easily people believed them, how ready they were to turn her back into a prop, a pawn, anything but herself. "Turn it off," Ruth said softly from the doorway. She looked tired, her usually pristine church dress wrinkled from pacing all night. Another subpoena lay crumpled on the desk behind her. Ayana clicked the remote. "They're saying Daddy planned it all, that he used me to make himself look good." Ruth's hands tightened on the doorframe. "Baby, we both know that's not true. You did this, all by yourself. Then why won't they believe me?" Before Ruth could answer, Mara appeared with her tablet. "Ayana, Good Morning America wants you. Live interview, tomorrow at 8. They're offering you a chance to tell your side." Ayana's spine straightened. This was what she'd wanted, a chance to speak. But something cold settled in her stomach when she saw Elijah hovering behind Mara, his face unreadable. "It's too risky," he said. "She's not media trained. One wrong word and—" "I want to do it," Ayana cut in. Her voice was firm, even though her hands had started to tremble. "I need to—" Elijah's jaw tightened. He studied her face, not like a father seeing his daughter, but like a lawyer assessing a witness. Finally, he nodded. Fine. But stick to simple answers. Let them lead the conversation. No. Ayanna stood up. I'm telling the truth. My way. The morning show studio was bigger than Ayanna expected, and colder. Bright lights made her squint as makeup artists fussed over her face. She wore a new blue dress, Elijah's choice, not her mother's. The fabric felt stiff and wrong. Ruth wasn't allowed in the studio. She watched from the green room, hands clasped in prayer. Elijah stood in the wings, phone in hand, ready to signal his media team if things went sideways. The host, Sandra Chen, smiled warmly as Ayanna settled into the oversized interview chair. Ready, sweetheart? Just pretend we're having a chat in your living room. Ayanna nodded. The red light blinked on. Cameras rolled. We're here with Ayanna Brooks, daughter of U.S. Attorney General Elijah Brooks, Sandra began. Ayanna, there's been a lot of confusion about what really happened in Rosewood. Can you tell us your story? Ayanna opened her mouth. The words were there. She'd rehearsed them all night. But suddenly the studio lights felt too bright. The cameras looked like hungry eyes. Her throat closed up. She glanced at Elijah in the wings. He was watching his phone, typing rapidly, not watching her at all. Her voice came out thin and shaky. I was just trying to... Sandra leaned forward, concern crossing her features. Take your time, dear. We all want to hear the truth. The truth. Such a simple word for such a complicated thing. Ayanna's hands trembled in her lap. She could feel the audience waiting, the cameras recording her silence, the weight of expectations crushing her chest. Maybe we should take a break, Sandra suggested gently. Shame burned in Ayanna's cheeks. She stood up, wobbling slightly in her new shoes. The microphone wire caught on her chair. Someone rushed to help her, but she waved them away and fled the stage. Elijah reached for her as she passed. His hand brushed her shoulder, but she jerked away like his touch burned. You told me I was strong, she whispered, tears finally spilling. Why didn't you believe it enough to stand with me? He had no answer. He never did, when it really mattered. The studio lights dimmed. Sandra's voice drifted over, calling for commercial, but Ayanna didn't hear any of it. She walked past the concerned producers, past her mother's outstretched arms, past everyone who wanted to fix or explain or control. Her voice had failed her, but maybe that was the loudest truth of all, how even the strongest voice could break under the weight of standing alone. In the dressing room, she stared at her reflection. The makeup was perfect. The hair was perfect. The dress was perfect. Everything was perfect except the trembling girl inside it all, who just wanted someone to stand beside her and say, I believe you, not because of proof or politics or public opinion, just because you're my daughter and your truth matters. But that girl was still waiting, still hoping, still learning that sometimes the hardest part of finding your voice was discovering who wouldn't speak up with you when it mattered most. Elijah arrives at Ruth's house after 12 years away, not as Attorney General, but as a father full of regret. Their reunion is quiet, heavy with unspoken pain. They talk over coffee, finally confronting the choices that tore their family apart. Elijah admits his absence and obsession with image. Ruth confesses she stopped trying too soon. They share memories of their daughter Ayanna, her early steps, her curiosity, her resilience, and agree to move forward united, not as opponents, but as parents. No more power plays, just love. Weeks later, Ayanna enters a federal courtroom in her freshly altered yellow dress, flanked by her parents. Calm and resolute, she testifies about being framed by Deputy Rourke and exposes a systemic scheme targeting innocent kids for profit. Her evidence, documents found in Elijah's files, triggers arrests and resignations, including that of Judge Thorne. The courtroom erupts in accountability, but Ayanna remains grounded. Her courage leads to real reform. Elijah is reinstated and appointed to lead a juvenile justice task force named in her honor. That night, Ayanna hums softly in her room, the yellow dress folded nearby. When Elijah tells her he came to save her, she gently replies, "No, Daddy. You finally let me save myself." If you enjoyed the story of Ayanna, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. If you enjoyed the story of Ayanna, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.